Is Trump embarrassed? Even US allies now seem to be seeking Iran's nod to cross the Strait of Hormuz amid war disruptions. Despite US claims of control, allies' behavior appears to suggest Tehran still holds real leverage in Hormuz. Even Washington's allies now seem to be testing the limits of Trump's blockade. After the Russian superyacht episode, a Japanese tanker's passage may deepen questions over who really controls Hormuz. Mujtaba minister's latest declaration could signal Iran still sees itself in the stronger position in Hormuz. Amid the blockade, a Japanese-owned supertanker successfully transited the Strait of Hormuz in one of the rare crude-carrying passages through the choke point during the conflict. The Idemitsu Maru became the first Japanese-owned crude tanker to cross Hormuz since February 28, according to reporting carried by Press TV and other outlets tracking the passage. Reports said the vessel's passage required coordination with Tehran, underscoring Iran's de facto control over transit conditions in the area during the blockade. That made the transit especially notable because Japan is a major US ally and depends heavily on Gulf energy flows even as sanctions and conflict have disrupted normal routes. Japan sources roughly 95% of its oil imports from West Asia, making the disruption caused by the war especially significant for Tokyo's energy security. The vessel was carrying about 2 million barrels of crude oil when it made the rare wartime passage through Hormuz. The ship is a Panama-flagged VLCC managed by the tanker arm of Japanese refiner Idemitsu Maru. Tracking reports said the tanker began moving on April 27 after remaining stationary off the UAE coast for more than a week. It was transporting crude loaded from Saudi Arabia's Jumeirah terminal in early March before the delayed exit through Hormuz. Ship tracking data also indicated that it briefly altered course near Iran's Keshem and Larak Islands before continuing eastward out of the strait. A yacht linked to a sanctioned Russian billionaire crossed the Strait of Hormuz on April 25, in a rare transit through the strategic waterway during the US blockade. The vessel, Nord, a 142-meter superyacht, was among the very few ships reported to have passed through Hormuz amid sharply reduced traffic. Tracking data showed Nord left a Dubai marina at around 14 o'clock GMT on April 24 and completed the strait crossing overnight into April 25. Marine tracking data further indicated that the yacht arrived in Muscat early on April 26 after the passage. The roughly $500 million yacht has been linked to Russian billionaire Alexei Mordashov, who is widely described as close to President Vladimir Putin. Mordashov is not listed as the direct owner, but registration records cited in reporting show Nord is held through a Russian company owned by his wife. Mordashov was among the Russian oligarchs sanctioned by the United States and European Union after Russia launched its war in Ukraine. Russian superyacht Nord is a 142-meter, 465-foot vessel built by Lursen and delivered in 2021. The yacht is widely estimated to be worth more than $500 million. It can accommodate about 36 guests, with listings describing between 20 and 21 staterooms or suites on board. Its luxury features include a swimming pool, helipad facilities, and space for watercraft and subsurface leisure equipment, with reports also describing multiple helipads and a large diving center. An Iranian minister said only Tehran would decide who gets passage through the Strait of Hormuz, reinforcing Iran's claim that access now depends on its approval. Iran's deputy defense minister said the current restrictions in Hormuz are a direct result of US and Israeli attacks, framing Tehran's tightened control as a response to wartime aggression. The minister's comments also signaled that Iran intends to keep exerting control over the waterway even after the war ends, rather than simply reverting to pre-war transit norms. Brigadier General Reza Tlaei Nix said, and I quote, "Allowing the smooth transit of commercial ships will be on the agenda after the end of the war, provided that protocols that do not jeopardize Iran's security are observed." Unquote. Iran is also planning to introduce a formal toll payment system for ships passing through the strait, turning its wartime leverage into a structured mechanism. Iranian officials and lawmakers have said the purpose is partly to compensate for losses built up over years of Western economic sanctions and maritime pressure. Taken together, the US-Israeli campaign appears to have strengthened Iran's ability to use Hormuz as leverage in diplomacy and regional bargaining. Iran International on April 28 explained that a US naval blockade would not stop Iran's oil exports immediately, arguing that Tehran still retains enough storage, routing flexibility and operational experience to keep some flows moving at first. The outlet said that even under a serious maritime blockade, Iran's oil system would not collapse overnight because disruption would show up first as tightening constraints rather than instant failure. Its assessment was that Iran could absorb the initial shock, adapt through evasive methods, and then see exports gradually tighten as pressure builds over time. Iran International's argument is that Karg Island is more than a transit point in Iran's oil chain and can initially serve as a buffer because it combines loading infrastructure with substantial storage. The island remains the central choke point in Iran's crude export system, with multiple assessments putting its share at roughly 90% of Iranian oil shipments. Normal export volumes moving through Karg are commonly estimated at about 1.5 million to 2 million barrels per day, depending on operating conditions and sanctions pressure. Karg's storage capacity is generally put in the 20 million to 30 million barrel range, which gives Iran short-term operational flexibility if outbound flows are disrupted. But under blockade conditions, that same flexibility can turn into a liability, because if tankers cannot load or sail consistently, storage tanks would start filling and the island would become a bottleneck rather than a release valve. Iran International said that if tankers cannot load or depart reliably, storage at Karg could fill within weeks because inflows would keep building while outbound shipments stall. Even in that scenario, the island would not instantly fail, but would keep operating under tighter constraints as storage pressure, loading delays, and production management problems mount. Iran would likely respond by leaning more heavily on ship-to-ship transfers and opaque shipping routes, tactics that have long been associated with its sanctions evasion network. Parts of the tanker fleet could also be used as floating storage offshore to buy time, and reporting has indicated that Iran has already relied on floating storage reserves during periods of intense export disruption. Domestic refiners and inland storage can absorb some extra crude for a time, which is one reason analysts say Iran could still manage limited overflow even if exports were disrupted. Years of sanctions have also given Iran's oil sector experience in operating under pressure, with Iran International arguing that this history has trained the system to improvise rather than freeze. That is why Iran would more likely trim production gradually than halt output outright, with outside analysis suggesting shut-ins would build over time instead of happening all at once. This assessment of Iran's oil export resilience surfaced as Trump was issuing a new ultimatum, adding urgency to the wider debate over whether maritime pressure can force quick economic collapse in Iran. US President Donald Trump has issued a fresh ultimatum to Iran, this time giving Tehran 3 days. Trump told Fox News that Iran now has 3 days before its oil pipelines explode from within. He also claimed there would be permanent damage to Iran's oil wells if oil flow is not restored. Donald Trump said, and I quote, "What happens is that line explodes from within. Both mechanically and in the earth. Something happens where it just explodes, and they say they only have about 3 days left before that happens. And when it explodes, you can never rebuild it the way it is. It's a very powerful thing that takes place sort of having to do with nature." Unquote. According to Trump, the ongoing US blockade would create catastrophic mechanical stress inside Iran's oil infrastructure. He further claimed that this pressure could trigger spontaneous explosions underground and within transport lines. However, energy experts say pipelines are typically equipped with safety valves and sensors designed to halt pumping before such failure spiral. They also note that if oil cannot move through the system, operators usually stop production at the source itself. That is why some experts believe Iran may still have roughly 2 to 3 months of inland storage before any forced production cut becomes necessary. Iran's vice president and head of the Strategic Energy Policy and Management Organization, Ismail Sagab Esfahani, has also reacted. Esfahani warned that Iran would retaliate against countries backing any damage to its oil sector. In a sharp response on X, he said, "Our math is different. 1 oil well equals 4 oil wells.